Hello again! In part 1 of this episode, we made a little torture rack, like this one that you can see here. So, if you haven't already seen that, it's probably best to go back and watch it first, otherwise, let's get started on the next piece. Okay then, to make a kind of hanging cage, we'll first take one of these textures, and glue that to some thin foam core or thick cardboard. And when that's dry, we'll cut it to size. Then we'll cut out a strip of the metal texture, that's the same width as the thickness of the foam, and glue that around the edge, so that we end up with this kind of thing that you can see here. Next, we'll take one of those tiny drinking straws and wrap that in some more of the metal pattern, which we can then cut to a suitable size. Anywhere between 1.5 inches and 2 inches should do. And we'll need 8 of those. Then we're going to add a tiny spot of hot glue to the end of one of the straws, and then stick that on top of one of the little kind of circular rivets in one of the corners. So there you go, something like that. Then we'll simply need to repeat the process for all 7 of the other straws, which is what you can see me doing here. So there's the last few going on now, and when we're done, it should end up looking something like this. So yeah, that's the start of our cage. Okay, next we'll need to make another of these pieces, and turn that upside down. Then we're going to take a bunch of toothpicks and cut off the pointed ends, as that's all we'll need. And to glue these into place, I'm going to use a bit of super glue again. And the aim here is to stick one of these in each corner of the octagon shape, maybe around 1 millimeter or so away from the edge. So this kind of thing. And just like I did with the straws, I'll speed this part up again while I do just that. And with any luck, we should now have a piece where the spikes of the toothpicks slot into the holes of the drinking straws, resulting in a cage that can be opened and closed. It's not a great way of achieving something like that, but it does kind of work. Okay, now we're going to do that thing that I mentioned in part 1, where I've cut out the outer rectangle of this texture after sticking it to some thick card, and then stuck the back texture onto the reverse side, so that when it's cut out, we end up with a piece with matching artwork on both sides. Then we'll glue this texture to some more thick card, and we'll first cut it along this line here, and then trim the rest to size, so that we end up with 2 pieces that look like this. Okay, this next part is going to be a bit hard to see, but what we're going to try and do is lay a ruler on top of the half of the pattern that has the 2 rivets shown, and then try to bend the other half around a toothpick. As I say, it's hard to see, it's hard to explain, so here's a picture of the kind of thing that I'm aiming for. And here's the actual piece when it's done. So hopefully that made sense. Anyway, I'll just quickly do the same thing again on the other piece. Like so. Now, to glue the chain into place, I'm going to use super glue again, and I'll simply dip the edge of the larger end into that, and stick it to the top of the cage. So, there you go, we're looking to glue it roughly in the middle. Okay, next I'll go back to the PVA, and we're just going to add some of that to the back of the flat side of one of the smaller pieces, and then stick that on top of the cage so that the curved part is pushed up against the side of the chain. So, the kind of thing that you can see here. And if I go ahead and do the same thing for the other one, it should end up looking like some kind of bracket that's fixed on top of the cage. You know, something for the chain to hook onto. Okay, for this next part, we'll need to make a base by gluing one of the existing floor patterns to a piece of thick card. Then we'll take an unused stick of hot glue and cut off a little piece that's going to be acting as a kind of flight stand. Then all we'll need to do is put a spot of hot glue on the bottom of the cage and stick that little off-cut piece in the centre, doing our best to make sure that the whole thing sits nice and flat. And to finish it off, we can add some more glue to the bottom of the little glue stick and fix that to the middle of the base. And there you go, there's the finished cage. Obviously, the little stick of hot glue isn't exactly transparent, but it kind of does a good enough job of making it look as though the cage is hanging in the air. Anyway, if I go ahead and take the top off, you should be able to fit a miniature inside, so long as it's on a standard 1" or 25mm base. But I'm not gonna lie, getting the top back on can be a bit awkward, so it's something you might want to set up before the game, rather than fiddling around with it mid-session. But yeah, there it is back in place, and on the whole, I think it will work well enough for those rescue the NPC kind of scenarios. Right then, next we'll make some stocks. And we'll do that thing again by gluing the front to some foam core, cutting out the outer rectangle, gluing the back piece on the back, and then cutting it to size when it's properly dry, and adding a strip of the wooden texture around the edge, just to finish it off. Then we'll do the exact same thing for the 2 side pieces as well. And for this one, it's a pretty easy assembly, as we're just going to hot glue the first piece near to the top of one of the side pieces, so this kind of thing, and then repeat the process on the other side, once again making sure that the whole thing sits nice and flat. And that's all there is to it for this one, so yeah, that's another piece done. Okay then, so this last piece is optional, but if you're familiar with the animals in the tiny terrain range, then this is pretty similar. So to make a rat, we'll first glue the texture to some card, and then cut out the kind of star shape. Then, when cutting the ears, we'll need to cut all the way to the end of this line, so right into the corner of the ears, and then trim away the excess. And I also like to cut off the sharp points as well. And that should leave us with something that looks like this. So if we then take a toothpick, we can bend the rat around it lengthways to get the legs into the right kind of position, though we will need to make sure that we don't bend the ears too much, maybe even bending them back out in the opposite direction slightly. And finally, we can bend the tail into a kind of S shape. And with any luck, that should result in a little rat, which we can then use to decorate any of the terrain pieces that we've made so far. So I think that's pretty much it for this one. However, you will notice that I've also included a new door and a new floor pattern on page 2 of the PDF, but I've made these so many times now that I didn't think they'd need an explanation. But if you're new to the channel, then you can catch up on all the basic techniques in the Build Along playlist. So thank you very much for watching. Feel free to do all that YouTube nonsense with the liking and ringing of bells and all that stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.